effort, right? And starting on time is a virtue. It's not a defect. It's a quality. So maybe we can start. My words will be short. Start by wishing you the best year ever in your long or short life, and thanking you to be around here. Thanking Dr. Alison Rose Jefferson, because I remember when this conversation started while Marianne was around and not on leave yet. You know, we learn about her work, and we learn about her desire to make this presentation. So we are happy to do it today. Maybe for me to extend Marianne's apology. Not only she was on leave, but she had to have an extension for problem related to her health. I want her to come back hale and hearty, because I'm crumbling over the burden of the extra work which is visiting on me because of her absence. But she'll be back, and I hope when she's back you will still be here so that you may meet. Also thank my dear former student, now turned colleague, Abdullah Njai. The moment I sent Abdullah either an SMS or an email, he immediately answered, yes, I am available and I will be willing to do it. Abdullah, thank you very much for this. In your double capacity as faculty in the Department of English in American Studies, but also as a chairman of the Association of American Studies, Senegalese Association of American Studies. So thank you for that. And this is not the only instance when I will be, asking you to do me a favor. It so happened that there is, in one group which is here, there is a young man who is from Trinidad. He is Trinidadian, and if you say Trinidad and Tobago, you talk about steel drum. If you've never seen a steel drum, check the film which was made on the first World Festival of Negro Art. Our then President, Leopold Sédar Senghor, invited people from Barbados, from Trinidad, from Tobago, and for the first time in Senegal, you could look and enjoy a steel drum band. But this young man is willing to perform, and I think he would like to perform with the student from the Department of English. That being said, Dr. Alison Rose, my name is Usman Sen, humbly, and humbly I think I am the director of the West Africa Research Center. So nice to meet you. So without further ado, maybe I am going to give you the floor and you make your presentation, and my colleague Abdullah will be the moderator, maybe getting back to your presentation, but also giving the floor to participants here to make their contribution and to ask questions. I think your presentation can go up to maybe 30 minutes. After that, it will be up to Abdullah to organize the discussion, which could take another 45 minutes. If people are very talkative, then full hour. And then that should be it. Would it work like that for you?
So I'm going to talk more like 40 minutes.
You're going to talk more than 40 minutes. So you're going to have her talk to you more than 40 minutes.
More than 30.
More than 30 minutes. Because there is also a presentation. There's a presentation. Oh, okay, yeah, I see. So, I mean, she's right. We have a PowerPoint. 30 minutes is just like drinking water. Huh? All right, and thank you, the MC student, for attending. I appreciate your presence. See, they are coming in. All right, so without further ado, Dr. Alison Rose Jefferson, the floor is yours, unless you want to say something before she starts.
No.
You will, yeah, okay, good, that's good. Here.
Okay, merci. So, can everyone hear me? Am I loud enough for the microphone for your recording? Okay, good. Well, I thank you all so much for having me come today to speak. This is a treat for me because I had to think about, I'm going to come to West Africa and I'm going to talk about the west coast of the United States. And I'm going to be talking about something that's really specific. And so I was concerned about the context of the colonial experience of West Africa with the French and the other European powers, and how it manifested, how American relationships with colonialism and then with nation building for the Americas of the British and then the enslavement period, how all of that would translate in terms of the different experiences. And so I realized that there are some universal themes that come through in the specificity of the work that I do in terms of dealing with this history that I'm going to share a bit with you today about. So my work as a historian and a heritage conservation consultant is about recovering, documenting, and sharing suppressed and neglected stories of people. I'm particularly interested in the African American experience in the context of the global diaspora of Black people. Intentionally, my work is a social action practice to expand knowledge for the construction of a more inclusive public culture, historical memory, and national identity encompassing the diverse experiences of the American people to help dismantle institutional racism. Today, my brief remarks will explore my recent book, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era. You will learn a little bit about how African Americans made California and American history by challenging racial and class structures when they occupied recreation sites and public space at the core of the state's formative 20th century identity. These places and spaces became contested ground in the development of attractive inland resorts and beach areas relatively free from white citizens' harassment. In Los Angeles, recreation and relaxation were essential components of liberty and distinctive civil concerns in the nation's long freedom rights struggle. Today I'm going to talk mostly about stories of the Santa Monica Bay cities. That's, as you can see on the map, you see Malibu and then you see Redondo. That's the Santa Monica Bay area. And I'm going to discuss the impact of some of these stories are having in contemporary times and how, in some instances, they are being used for society's betterment. In contrast to the city where Black Angelenos lived California waterfront and pastoral inland places where they went to relax and invest in real estate included Los Angeles, in Los Angeles County, Bruce's Beach in Manhattan Beach, Santa Monica's South Beach neighborhoods, and Eureka Villa, known today as the Valverde area in Santa Clarita Valley. In Riverside, Lake Elsinore and Corona's Park Ridge Country Club and a few other places are covered in my book. At these places, African Americans found joy, developed businesses, and invested in real estate. They embraced the booster, promoted California dream of a leisure lifestyle in picturesque outdoor in picturesque outdoor settings and new life opportunities, even while discrimination and lax enforcement of California's civil rights laws established as early as 1893 many times prevented them from using various public and private facilities, buying land in many areas for decades into the 20th century. They were more self-confident and sometimes militant in demanding their rights as citizens and as consumers. Mostly relocating from United States southern places in escape of the worst of Jim Crow era anti-black racist restrictions, African American migrants began moving from the South in large numbers to the Los Angeles area in the decades surrounding the turn of the 20th century. They joined a multi-ethnic community that included whites and people of color, along with migrants from many other backgrounds. Despite some racial discrimination challenges they found in their new home, African Americans actively participated in California's development through the early 20th century Great Migration. They bought homes and other property, they raised families, they launched businesses, created social and faith institutions, and nurtured a rich cultural milieu that included the emergence of West Coast jazz and R&B. As California undertook leisure, many found it restricted and themselves excluded from this way of life. White boosters broadcasted this rhetoric and imagery about leisure lifestyle pleasures as messages in mass media, speaking to white consumers to create a sense of place in the California social and physical landscape that excluded people of color. In the white boosters' message, black and other communities of color were situated as laborers, if at all, rather than neighbors or social equals. Unwilling to accept exclusion, black Angelenos, like their brothers and sisters in other places around the U.S., developed separate spaces for emotional and physical rejuvenation to circumvent the oppressive racial subjugation of the era and to promote a renewed sense of racial pride, cultural self-expression, economic independence, and a mix of progressive political perspectives that were the embodiment of the new Negro determined to achieve a fuller participation in American society. The experiences and memories of these leisure spaces and destinations and the attention they gained in public memory and newspapers of the era offered African Americans new and broader visions of themselves, a new identity, and a new collective sense of freedom contributing to cultural and intellectual efforts that defined the new Negro in this era. In California, African Americans' ambitions and initiatives for leisure space also radically claimed, challenged, and promoted the state's identity in the consumption of leisure as a lifestyle that would spread across the country to develop a new suburban middle class culture and identity. So in 1912, Willa Bruce, supported by her husband Charles, purchased Pacific Ocean shoreline property to create a resort service business that became informally known as Bruce's Beach. And some of you actually may have read or heard about this place because it's been in the news all over the world in the last 2 years, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So this place in the city of Manhattan Beach was a very popular gathering place for African Americans of all social classes on weekends and in the summertime. This successful venture spurred other African Americans to buy land and build vacation cottages nearby. From the first day of operation, the Los Angeles Times newspaper reported that many Manhattan Beach white supremacist residents, including city founders George Peck and Frank Doherty, undertook private harassment actions and eventually legal sanctions to discourage African Americans or discourage black people from visiting and settling in the area. By the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan, who you all are somewhat familiar with, an anti-black organization, also joined in these harassment actions to push out the Bruce's Beach resort property owners and day trippers. A proposal to seize the Manhattan Beach North End neighborhood through what's called eminent domain proceedings. That's where the state takes the land because they want to do some kind of public benefit with it. So they took this land to create a park, and a proposal was submitted by private white citizens to the city council, and this proposal to take this land for a park was eventually approved in 1924. It was pointed out at the time that if a park was needed, there was other property nearby containing fewer buildings which could have been condemned with less trouble and expense. In the mid-1920s, this area was almost uninhabited, rural, and the most remote section of the Manhattan Beach shoreline. After challenges to these proceedings were unsuccessful, the evicted Bruce and other black resort community property owners settled for the most favorable sale price they could obtain. Whether they were adequately compensated for their land and lost social, cultural, economic opportunities has remained open to debate into the 21st century. Racial prejudice, aided by abusive use of state power, eliminated the African American residential and economic development of the Bruce's establishment and the small resort cottage community, along with destroying black beachgoers' social space with attempts to erase the site's memory from history. Only through political assertion has a limited revival of the history of Bruce's Beach and its incorporation into the public record emerged in the early decades of the 21st century. In their first organized civil disobedience protest action in the region, members of the Los Angeles branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which some of you may be familiar with, was an early 20th century civil rights organization in the United States. So in 1927, they challenged Manhattan Beach officials when they tried additional measures to make the beach white only. Although Bruce's Beach, the Bruce's Beach community was destroyed when the NAACP members staged a swim-in protest for which they were arrested and fined. Through legal maneuvers, clarification was won that African Americans had the legal right to enjoy this and all California beaches. This was an important civil rights and beach access victory, not just for African Americans, but for all Californians. The coming decades with this accomplishment, in the coming decades with this accomplishment, African Americans' more confident assertion of their legal rights contributed to racial restriction attempts by whites at the state's public beaches fading away. As the 20th century advanced, African Americans around the U.S. would increasingly utilize legal actions and public protests to dismantle legally sanctioned along with informally enforced discrimination and segregation at public accommodations and places. The Bruce's Beach landholders and visitors were not alone in facing legal sanctions and private harassment actions discouraging African Americans from visiting and settling in particular beach towns as the region's population increased during the 1920s. There were confrontations and assaults across decades into the 1950s, some of which turned violent, aimed to bar African Americans from public beaches and shoreline development opportunities at other Los Angeles and Orange County places. Black citizens would continue to mount legal challenges to these discriminatory practices endeavored by whites. And you can pick up my book and you can read more about some of these other places. Finally, constructed in the late 1950s, more than 30 years later, the land taken by eminent domain for a Manhattan Beach park in 1924 was formally renamed Bruce's Beach in 2007 to recognize the African American pioneers who recreated as they attempted to build wealth through real estate investments and to forge community. The new park naming simultaneously acknowledged the white racist sabotage of those pioneers. That is, if one had knowledge of that is, if one has knowledge of the parkland site's history. This was the first step to making the broader public more aware of the accomplishments of Manhattan Beach's African American pioneers who, in spite of challenges, took action to develop part of their Californian American dreams around leisure culture that would define Southern California identity and spread across the nation. So fast forward to 2020, new energy arose to reclaim the important marginalized California ocean coastline history of African American places of joy, freedom, struggle, community building, and economic development sabotaged during the Jim Crow era. Bruce's Beach in Manhattan Beach and the Bay Street Beach in Santa Monica, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a few minutes, became recognized by the public in new visible ways as sites of conscience reflection, healing, and pilgrimage at this time when racial inequalities laid bare by the long history of injustice that led to the death of several African Americans, George Floyd and others, at this time. The idea of the Bruce's family land being returned to their descendants reemerged with a more heightened sense of urgency at this time. Joining this global racial reckoning response, joining the global racial reckoning responses, Manhattan Beach Politi proposed new interpretive panels and artwork at the Bruce's Beach Park section that the city owns to tell the story in a fuller fashion. Meanwhile, California State and Los Angeles County elected officials passed legislation to allow for the return of beachfront property owned by Los Angeles County to the descendants of Charles and Willa Bruce, from whom it was wrongfully taken in the 1920s. This is an extraordinary example of what reparations could look like in California and across the nation in certain situations. Some have said this is the first time land has been returned to an African American family, by a government entity as a way to make amends for discriminatory policies in California and possibly in the nation. What these public officials have done opened up new ways of thinking about how to redress and recognize the legacy of social injustices done to African Americans that have not been fully explored in the past. This restitution act of giving the land back to the Bruce family descendants has provided an opportunity for them to accrue generational wealth that was lost. In the last week since I've been here in Senegal, the family made a deal with the county of Los Angeles for the county to buy the land instead of them getting rent from the county for this land, because the county has a facility on the land. They have a lifeguard training station on the land. And so the county has bought them out for 20 million American dollars. And so the family has recouped some of the lost wealth over generations. So with that, this whole situation has also provided some psychological healing for those, some psychological healing for the loss of the opportunity for the descendants and the African American community in general. These moves are a good thing, but we must think more deeply about the events of 100 years ago and their legacy. This restitution will not provide tangible collective benefits to the purged African Americans of all classes from Manhattan Beach that lost out on the vibrant socio-economic cultural space where today they make up less than 0.5% of the city's 35,000 population. The broader social justice, for broader social justice to occur, our elected officials need to implement innovative public programs which encourage African American cultural, social, and economic attainment opportunities in Manhattan Beach and at other California beaches and beyond. The renaming of the renamed park, Bruce's Beach, has already created some social benefit in the identified sense of place in the landscape of America and the region that allows for a more culturally inclusive collective identity and social history encompassing a public memory. It is important to integrate the untold stories and more problematic, controversial, and sensitive aspects of the national experience into national narratives, as they show how the past influences the present and where we as a nation in America should go in the future. The park name honors the Bruce's Beach pioneers and the Black Angelenos in their ambitions and initiatives that challenge the era's white supremacist ideas, and it honors them for their asserted determination to participate in socio-cultural economic amusement and relaxation trends that were considered modern by the 1920s, and their broader visions of themselves and their community. The land return and now the sale of the land to Los Angeles County will hopefully join the Bruce's Beach name on the park to honor the memory of the many African Americans who enjoyed the beach and struggled for their California dream during the Jim Crow era and beyond. We as citizens, activists, and public officials in the United States have to continue to find ways to recognize marginalized groups and their heritage in Manhattan Beach and elsewhere through our collective intentional actions of inclusiveness and diversity for social justice, and not talking points for the appearance of political correctness. Santa Monica's Bay Street Beach became the site of memorial events to call attention to the social justice issues of the day as well. Santa Monica's public officials and citizens since 2020 also have supported new initiatives to foster meaningful change and advancement for equity and inclusion. The Santa Monica social justice events were held at a place near where African Americans were able to build a sustained community in a city founded in the 1880s. These residents established themselves a few blocks from the Pacific Ocean shoreline in the environs of the Bay Street Beach. This is in the southern area of the Civic Center today, nearby Phillips Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, which was the city's first African-American-owned spiritual and institutional space. It was the denomination's first church. It was the denomination's first church west of Texas. A short way south, a Venice enclave began forming in the same period, which was considered part of the Santa Monica African American community. In my current research project, I'm examining this Black Venice experience in a more in-depth manner than has been done before. It's notable that an African American community in Los Angeles' Venice district and the city of Santa Monica have managed to survive waves of discrimination and wealthification for more than a century. In the years surrounding Phillips Chapel's beginning in 1908, in the South Santa Monica Beach neighborhoods, the oceanfront area down the hill around Pico, south a few blocks, the space down the hill around Pico from the church emerged as a gathering place where African Americans from all over Los Angeles County and beyond came to enjoy the beach's pleasures. While the boundaries shifted through time, it was a popular beach destination for African Americans from 1900 to the 1960s. Many beachgoers once referred to this area as the Bay Street Beach. White people, referring to the darker skin color of the beach goers, also called this place by derogatory names. One of these names was the Inkwell. Some people have repurposed this name as a badge of pride. Others, even today, will not use this name for the place. Accessible by streetcar near a blossoming African American enclave centered around Phillips Chapel and a few black-owned businesses, this beach gathering place with La Bonita and a few other guest house, eating places, tennis courts, volleyball nets, and other recreational opportunities became a place of refuge and community building. In 1922, a group of African American investors led by prominent attorney Charles S. Darden, who he also was a resort developer at one of the other places I cover in my book called Lake Elsinore, and businessman Norman O. Houston, who would go on to become a founder of Golden State Mutual Life Insurance business, which was one of the largest businesses in the United States that African Americans owned in the West until it closed in the last 20 years. They sought to develop a first-class beach resort in South Santa Monica. The plan that they had was met with protests from white residents and businessmen. Santa Monica's racist white city officials and other citizens blocked the development from happening. After the Black Investment Group abandoned its plan, the property was purchased by white developers. The white group's business plan for a beach resort was approved by Santa Monica officials, allowing the construction of the iconic Casa del Mar Club, which is still there today, but now it's a hotel, and another beach club, the Edgewater, and today on that site is a hotel called Shutters on the Beach, and all of these were built before 1930. These Santa Monica Black enterprises were among a few attempts at beach area business development that were sabotaged by white supremacist actions, overlapping the rise of black beach culture and residency to support a deepened community life and an African American made place in Southern California beach city environs in the first half of the 20th century. While racial discrimination, in particular racist restrictive covenants, inhibited African Americans from buying property throughout the urban region, and their beach service businesses were sabotaged by white supremacist actions into the 1950s. The community's presence and agency sustained their public space usage at the oceanfront near this public park that was around the Bay Street area. And you can see the little red arrow, that's where the beach area is that I'm talking about. So this and other Southern California leisure spaces marked an African American identity on the region on the regional landscape and social space as they confronted the emergent power politics of leisure space and set the stage for these sites as places for remembrance of invention and public contest. The City of Santa Monica's 2005 local landmark designation of Phillips Chapel CME Church, Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, set the stage in 2008 for official recognition of this, for official recognition of the historic African American beach gathering place with a cultural monument. Also recognized was Nick Gabaldon, the first documented surfer of African American and Mexican descent in the Santa Monica Bay. Gabaldon died in a surfing accident in 1951 when he was 24 years old. In contemporary times, he has become an easy figure for many in diverse audiences to connect with. His story links to more complex, culturally inclusive stories of our collective, of the American collective national history and of global history, beach access issues, watershed stewardship, because of it links to all of the story links to all these things because of surfing's romantic attraction and emotional entanglement with nature, with beauty and the body, and the practice of surfing and just having fun out in the water. He represents African Americans of his era that challenged racial and class structures by confronting the emergent power politics of leisure and recreation access when they sought self-fulfillment, surfed, and hung out at the oceanfront, a public space that was a centerpiece of California's 20th century identity. The stories of African Americans' actions to use this and other beaches embody the local stories that contribute to the national narrative of mass movement to open leisure space to all, demonstrating how the struggle for leisure and public space, along with political and economic issues, reshaped the long freedom rights struggle. In June 2019, the same beach area was honored with a listing as the Bay Street Beach Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places for its significance in the African American experience in the U.S. in U.S. history. And myself and another colleague, Michael Blum, of a nonprofit called, or a non-governmental agency called Sea of Clouds, were instrumental in getting this nomination to happen, to get it on the National Register. This is the first historic district in Santa Monica to receive this national honor, and one of the few in California associated with any people of color or with women. As a publicly engaged historian, I have helped to coordinate and facilitate remembrance of African American voices at Santa Monica's historic sites through the development of innovative public programming partnerships between several different NGOs that cross Heritage, the Santa Monica Conservancy, Heal the Bay, that crosses ocean stewardship, watershed management, the Black Surfers Collective, another group, the Surfbutts organization, and also public officials. The benefits of ongoing investment in pluralistic heritage and nature education through these partnerships is important to continue building future pathways to wider and younger audiences, as well as established audiences in support of heritage and nature conservation ideals. This programming, such as Nick Yavaldon Day, International Coastal Cleanup Day, which you all may participate in here, may participate in Senegal, field trips for youngsters from inland areas, and the Belmar History and Art Project, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, actively connects diverse publics to more complex, culturally inclusive stories of our collective American history and heritage conservation issues, as well as beach wildlife appreciation and watershed stewardship, as well as aspirations to environmental justice policies involving beach access issues and social action intersecting with beach recreation. As part of the California Coastal Commission's policy mandate and my advocacy, Santa Monica officials were required to develop an educational program to teach the public about the erased African American visitors, residents, about the history of the erased African American visitors, residents, and business people who contributed to making Santa Monica a vibrant and unique place from the 1900s to 1960 in the beach neighborhoods of this city, as part of a construction permit as a condition of on a construction permit to allow them to build what is now the new historic Belmar Park. The commissioners saw my proposal as an action to set in motion their new, wider environmental justice policy strategies and implementation of their new authority at that particular time to help ensure equitable coastal access for marginalized communities. Santa Monica officials found funding to develop this new initiative attached to this park construction and invited me to participate in its development. This programming became Belmar History and Art, and it's a multifaceted education, inspirational, remembrance, and commemorative justice initiative that includes a context essay, a permanent outdoor exhibition, installation that includes interpretive text panels, and a large or monumental sculpture. It includes lesson plans for kids in grade school and other educational programming that is going to continue to bring this area's history to life in present and future generations. So as the nation and the world have been grappling simultaneously with a pandemic and a reinvigorated longing for racial equality and black dignity, along with the efforts to strengthen our democratic norms and values after the domestic terrorism of our nation's capital America's nation's capital in January 2021, Belmar History Plus Art is timely as a contribution as it helps open and inform contemporary life for understanding of those who came before us in Santa Monica's historical African American community life. It helps build a broader, richer, and more accurate understanding of our shared history and identity in our national, regional, local, and global citizenship. At the same time, this project is a reminder of the African American community's loss, that there is still so much and that there's still so much that's not understood about the history and places of Santa Monica, California. and the U.S., which need to be documented and made more known to people. In the last few years, celebration and symbolism of the changes and solidarity with the new racial justice movement around the world have been articulated in dismantling, defacing, and scheduling of removal of monuments which symbolize iconography of a racist past that are a reminder of how official systems have failed us. A wide range of structures are described as monuments, commemorative and storytelling spaces. And they exist at the intersection of public space and political power, public memory, and the enthusiasm of the groups that installed them. Removal of public space symbols to a racist past are a significant step to a more just future and are important overdue structural reforms. Symbolism matters. Recognition of more diverse narratives, sites, and creation of new knowledge and public displays that recognize the underrepresented and challenge hegemonic and white supremacist narratives will help connect to a more representative history and identity. These new initiatives can be vehicles for healing and education, as well as sites that offer opportunities for cultural tourism in communities. These highlighted old, new, and needed future public actions are also reminders there are still changes that must occur to dismantle white supremacy, police brutality, and anti-black racism for a better society. Simultaneously to needed national heritage conservation policy reform in the United States and potentially around the world in terms of other nations and their policies, new forms of monuments and spaces rooted in the ideas of commemorative justice should be asked for by those demanding more inclusive narratives in public displays. And by commemorative justice programs and ideals, I'm not just talking about a physical thing. I'm talking about programming that can filter through the society, through the educational system. Like I talked about the programs that we're doing with kids to give them information about the history, either in the classroom or in the experiential programs that we're offering on the beach. So these broader and innovative ways of sharing untold stories and places of black life alongside designating landmarks, erecting traditional monuments, and other remembrance spaces will have a more lasting societal structural effect. This is what we hope we've done in the development of Belmar History and Art's multifaceted education, inspirational, and remembrance programming that tells a more complex American story that will enliven the past in resonant ways for more diverse constituents. The reconstruction of public meaning of Santa Monica's urban landscape and heritage conservation amplifies a broader societal understanding of black life as part of our collective and diverse California cultural heritage to provide broader coastal zone accessibility for present and future generations. The Santa Monica Bay initiatives I've discussed today are important symbolic actions of equity and inclusion for commemorative, social, and environmental justice that recognize African Americans and other marginalized communities have contributed to making the colorful history of Santa Monica and California. That we have a right to historical and cultural sites, a place in the American identity, and the joys of cultural expression and self-fulfillment, along with clean air, clean water, and the enjoyment of all America's natural and socioeconomic resources. Like many white Americans, black Americans were lured to California for its opportunities and the good life imagery produced by writers, painters, photographers, and movie makers, which were used by various boosters over the years promoting migration to the state. The stories and imagery of African Americans who participated in various phases of the Western migration and settlement continue to remain largely absent from the dominant mythologies and history surrounding the Western migration, notwithstanding the investigations of the Black West that have been published in the last 50 years. So today I've briefly highlighted little-known stories about African American agency and socioeconomic investment in the California Dream lifestyle at destinations in Southern California. The intersection of the stories that I have shared with you that have come from my book and the public process activities I have discussed for education, remembrance of our collective history, cultural identity. When I say our collective history, that even includes you all here, and cultural identity and stewardship action offer new ways to connect people with natural, cultural, and historical heritage, and encourage visitation to these locations and others around the U.S. and the world. As a historian, I'm going to continue to firmly engage in encouraging people to use history for these broader education programs for wider equity and access for all people's enjoyment of California and other American cultural and natural resources now and in the future. So I hope that you will take time to learn a little bit more about these forgotten California Western pioneers and their undertakings, and ponder the implications of their stories and for your lives today. And I hope that you'll pick up my book and take a look at it, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Jefferson, for this brilliant presentation. I think we all enjoyed it, and we all learned a lot, a great deal about, these leisure sites, but especially about that history, of African Americans, that part of their history. And thanks also for taking me back to 4 years ago when I was a visiting scholar in the University of Southern California, and I was lucky to visit some of those sites, Santa Monica, Venice Beach, and especially the day when I visited the African American Museum was the day I've learned most, among all the days I spent there, by just visiting the African American Museum and learning about all those stories, those pictures. And it's really, there are some things that you just cannot learn in the university classes, but you have to go and visit and try to grasp the experience and heritage of all those powerful and poignant stories. Thank you very much. So I'm going to open the floor for people who would like to ask questions and make contributions. So I think we can take a set of 3 questions. All right, and then you can answer. So, names, and then we. Who wants to start? Corcasal? Dr. Corcasal. We started our PhD together, and then she left
Oh.
the US.
Oh.
Yes. Who else? Okay, so you can go first.
Thank you, Dr. Jefferson, and really, really congratulations for this amazing work that you've done. I was listening to you and I was just so proud and so happy that we have some people really revisiting history and reclaiming the history of African American communities in the U.S. but also around the world. And I think most of the points that you raised here are really not only specific to California, but you can even think about it in a broader landscape if you're thinking about gentrification, right? You were talking, and I was already like picturing Harlem, because I mean my research is on Harlem Renaissance in New York in the 1920s, and as you were talking, I said this is a specific, justification or like reason or example of how Black people are connected, right? And during that time also, how it was really the building community was part of the artistic work.
Yes.
Part of like the philosophy, part of even just leisure, like
Yes.
going to the beach.
Yes.
That was an act of like not only celebrating your identity, but also really connecting and reconnecting with your community. So I think some of the points that you raised that really made me thinking about space and how we usually there's like a mental, physical separation of space, but also a mental separation. So sometimes especially in those areas, like we were so automatically viewed as a not to go, like you cannot go in that area already among the African American community, right? And so for these people to really reclaim that, go to the beach, and then not only go to the beach, but really like reconnect through the beach by building, all these hotels or like training or doing just like, nice things, socio-economic, part of their life. So my question is about, like right now when we think about, like what's happening, yes, we have a little bit of reconnection or reparation, if you can call it that way, of like renaming, for example, the first Black surfer, or, giving this family the land that they own for a long time that has been taken away from them. It's great, right? But do you think there's also something more concrete that can be done? I love the idea of like engaging in the curriculum, having kids learn history, but sometimes I think that if you go to monuments, you visit them without really like having like getting prepared in terms of like what you can find there. It can just be that, or a list of things that I've done. Like I went here, I went to this monument. What can we do to really like have a more sense of reconnection, especially not only just the white community, like, but also even like some like mixed race and like some people that have really like different identities all mixed up. How do we get them more connected to like the history of
So I didn't know your research was the Harlem Renaissance, but I mean, some of the forming of many of these communities was during the 1920s. And so they were directly influenced by the national Renaissance that was occurring. It wasn't only in Harlem, it was all over the country. And as you mentioned a few things other than literature, it was manifested in quite a number of ways, and leisure was one of these ways in terms of building these new leisure communities and demanding access to what America had to offer and to a broader place in American society. So that is something that that black people in the United States were Americans too, and that they could participate in everything that America had to offer. We may have had to fight to get there, but we were able to. We were fighting for the rights of the riches of America. So with that, in terms of more contemporary times, in getting young people to understand this history and how it impacts our lives today, curriculum, putting it in the lessons of schools is one way to do it. And then also the physical sites of these places with the naming of the Bruce's Beach Park. In Santa Monica, we have a recognition of the Bruce's Beach, of the Santa Monica Bay Street Beach area, and we're getting ready to get, there is a marker there now, but there's going to be another marker. There's been all kinds of media that has been done on multiple levels about particularly the beach areas over the last few years, because there's been more activity in terms of reinserting the presence of African Americans in these places. And the activities that we're doing to take kids to learn about ocean stewardship, we're giving them this experience of the natural conservation ideals along with the heritage conservation ideals. So I'm a big believer that there's intersecting ways to give people information so that they may not get the deep history, but they at least get something that they can grab onto. I mean, most people don't know the full story of Bruce's Beach, but they've read about a little bit of it in the news in terms of the United States. Some people have read a little bit about it in the news, over the last few years. And I've been standing down at Bruce's Beach sometimes by the marker where the park name is described, and people stop their cars and they just come, they read the plaque, and they take a picture. And there was one day that I was down there, and this woman brought her granddaughters. She parked the car across the street. She sent the two granddaughters across the street to read the plaque. And she saw me and a few other people standing there, and she yells out the window, "This is our beach!" She's driving a Mercedes, okay? All right. So, people are inspired by the stories when even if they only have a little bit of information about it. And so all we can do is put the material out there the best that we can. The fact that I was able to do my book, and I have a whole chapter on the Bruce's Beach situation and these other places, nobody had documented the history in the way that I had documented it over the last 100 years. For the Bruce's Beach site, the other thing that's happened is that my book has been optioned for a TV series. And it's with Brad Pitt and Viola Davis and Amazon. And so if it gets made and on TV, it'll be a few years out. If it happens, then that's another way to allow our stories to be told. And as you all are probably aware of, the new movie that Viola Davis has out, Warrior Queen. Have you seen it? You saw it? Yes, it's amazing. Okay. Now, it is historical fiction. I mean, it's, you know, we have a lot of real history in it. But the portrayal of the people and the way in which, you know, they're presented as strong individuals and complex individuals. They're not one-dimensional. And so that's important in terms of telling our stories. So we have to just do more of it as well in terms of, you know, getting our stories on paper, in videos, in newspaper articles. There's no easy path to getting our stories out there.
Thank you very much. I think you're becoming a celebration now.
Yeah.
So really congratulations for all those works really that you're doing. Yes, Dr. Deliverance Zale.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me the floor. Dr. Allison, congratulations once again for your insightful presentation. It's always a pleasure to see, you know, historians sharing their research, because history is very important. You forget about your history, you wouldn't understand, you know, where the present would lead you to. So it's very important to pay attention to history. And in America especially, we have been having like the George Floyd, the Emmett Till, because history, you know, has been silent for a long time. And the reckoning of the George Floyd happened because somehow we had the pandemic, and a lot of people were not able, you know, to go to work. People, you know, struggling, you know, on a daily basis, minimum wage. They were able to follow the news and see, you know, what was happening for years. And now in America, we have a lot of universities being interested in African studies, American studies, and I think, you know, that is something we have to cherish. But still, it's very important to revisit history, because history is everything. So thank you once again for the job you did.
Thank you. What is your discipline?
Yeah, I'm specialized in American studies, but I had my PhD in political science, and the title actually was, or is, yeah, Americanizing Blacks through the Constitution, from the Three-Fifths Clause to felony disenfranchisement. Mm-hmm. So I've been visiting history, you know, since the Three-Fifths Clause, you know, to present. I was, you know, digging into seeing how the laws have been interacting with African Americans for years. And at some point, people talked about, you know, post-racial America when Obama became president.
Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, we all know, you know, and then President Donald Trump just popped up. So, so, you know, showing another face of America. So, and you know the ending. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Zale. Yes.
I have another question for you. When you discussing the beach, right? Did you get a chance to think about like going back to slavery? How, for example, they were going to the beach not just as a leisure, but also reconnection with their past, or was it just like you studied it in 1912, like around that area, 20th century?
So, in terms of the United States and beach culture, if there was a reconnection from the standpoint of people choosing to go to the beach to reconnect with their roots, it would probably be some people who were on the East Coast because of the Atlantic world. So that might be a context for some people there. On the West Coast, it was really more about hey, the beach is here. This is something that Californians do. It's hot, you know, and we're going to go to the beach. That's what I think. It's interesting that you would ask that question, because in terms of, I thought you were going in another direction, actually. I thought that you were going to ask me more about the connection of black people and water generally from the west coast of Africa, in terms of the historical experience of people using the waterways for recreation, but also for commerce. And so I thought you were going in that direction, and I was going to say that we have a film that is in its early stages of being distributed, called Wade in the Water. The journey of black people into surfing and aquatic culture. The last part I have wrong, but you can find it online. And with that, in that film, David Mesvin, who is the director, he is looking at Southern California beach culture and looking at surfing and how it has evolved from the Atlantic world to this global phenomena. And he interviews, there's a historical piece, but there's also then contemporary interviews with various young people, and also some older people who were like maybe the surfers of the 1960s, and they've aged out, but they were very involved in establishing surfing in terms of the African American community, in terms of people visualizing African Americans in surfing. And there's not that many folks that are African American that surf, but there's enough of them that there's now several different organizations in the United States that focus on encouraging people to enjoy surfing. And so that may be something that you all want to look into. There's another film also, since I'm talking about films, Whitewash, which talks about the older experience of folks surfing. That came out in 2011. Yeah, 2011. And Mesvin's film, it's rolling out right now. It has its formal debut in a couple of weeks, but he's done some screenings. And both of these films I'm involved in some way from the standpoint of sharing some information.
Yeah, and I think our common friend Pamela is very interested in.
And then there's another young filmmaker, Pamela Johnson, who has also, she's working on a film around African Americans and Senegalese surfer. I'm not exactly sure what her film is that she's working on right now, but it has to do with the surfing world, and she's done a short film that Abdullah helped with. She's done a short film about Senegalese surfing and water culture, connecting to the East Coast of the United States with someone who has been developing swimming programs between here and the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah, I met with the family, you know, they were here. And Pamela was here a few years ago, and she is very interested in that connection. And that program is about Senegalese surfers and swimmers also. And also we attended together the Gori Island, you know, swim competition. And she's making, you know, very interesting, you know, videos on it. And it's very interesting. And that family is from Washington, D.C., right? And they are surfers, and they have a young child also. It's very, very interesting, you know, to try to connect, you know, those traditions.
There's actually, in the Wade in the Water film, David Mesvin interviews two contemporary Senegalese surfers, to make that connection to Africa and to the United States.
Yes. Sir, what's your name, please?
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation. I'm Professor Djibrisek. I'm in the same area in public space, physical education, popular education, and popular areas in leisure and sport. And I have read your summary and the keywords, but by traffic jam I have missed.
I understand.
Your speech, your first speech. And in the same way, we work in the same way, and here, everywhere people lived, minorities have to fight, to have space, to have a way to express themselves. If you go to Medina right now, you see how young boys deal with cards on the road to play football or other games. And between two card keepers, they put the stones and they play football. And you see when you run with your car, you have to deal the space with the net. And I think in the same way, when you have, where you have done your work and research, have similarities here. In traditional sports, also in, for example, traditional games like wrestling.
And you have a national particular type of wrestling here.
How women go to wrestling from their village to Olympic Games. Even if during colonization in this area, it was forbidden, for example, at a certain period in the year, to go wrestling. Because people go against this law. If they go to different games, and they have their strategy to play their games. And till now, girls from the traditional game, wrestling, girls are now Olympics and world champions. I think that research is very accurate. Excuse me about my broken English.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Yeah, we're fine.
I try to be an affluent with myself.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah. Thank you. I understand. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of things in terms of identity and making space for marginalized groups in terms of thinking about strategies. Of this, we have the strategies of these people, and then we have strategies of the women who are, going on. Because that's one thing I've noticed here. I was like, I've seen lots of men doing sports stuff, but I haven't seen women. And so I made a comment to somebody about it, and they said, "Oh, you're just not in the right place." I was like, okay. Because I've seen men bicyclers. I've seen men runners. I've seen men football players, but I haven't seen any women doing sports. Now, the football players are, on the beach. I have seen maybe one or two women in the water, but they weren't swimming. They were just kind of in the water. So I was wondering about that.
I think women are more into, indoors, sport practicing.
Okay.
While men are, if you go to down Ifa, for example, no, we would like that culture. In my district, for example, in those gymnasiums, you have many women practicing sports. But for going to the beach and working out, you see more men than women.
because of patriarchy, I'm telling you.
Well, that was what I thought, but I wanted to be careful about how I characterize things because I'm coming from another cultural context, and I was like, well, maybe I am not seeing people because of where I am, and you've just explained part of it is that that they are, in other places, because somebody said something to me about women play a lot of volleyball. Is it volleyball?
Volleyball, yes, also.
Yeah, that they play, and so that doesn't necessarily mean that you would be outdoors playing volleyball, and so I wouldn't, necessarily see that. Yes, I was, I'm being careful. I don't want to offend anybody.
No.
I'm your guest.
No, feel free to speak your mind, but it's part of it. It's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But cultural check also is also part of it, But women are more and more practicing sport, I think. Doesn't agree.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree. It's just like, the way that we see women, first of all, like the way that we divide the space, it's not inviting to women, like to go, for example, to the beach and beach balls and stuff. Because the few ones that you would see is always like that glance of like, you feel that you don't fit. You know what I mean? And that's how like the society is kind of built. Yes, please, I'm telling you.
Well, I that was what I kind of maybe felt that might be, but because I don't live here and I don't experience life here, I just was observing. I had all kinds of consternation about what I should be wearing when I came here because I had heard all these different stories, and it's not like I'm, I dress nicely, but I was concerned. Somebody said, "Oh, you can't have your shoulders out." I'm like, "What?" And you can't wear your dress above your knee. I'm like, "What?" So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to wear a long dress, I'm going to have my shoulders out. Okay. So.
All right. Next questions. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, thank you, Dr. Jefferson, for your outstanding presentation. I really appreciate. So when it comes to sports...
So tell us who you are.
The name first.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. My name is Noel Baji. I'm one of the students of Dr. Abdoulaye Ndiaye.
And you're a graduate student, right?
Yes.
I'm a master's student.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm really glad today if you talk about history, especially concerned where black African Americans are concerned, because I had the golden opportunity to have a presentation some month ago on Black Lives Matter.
On
Black Lives Matter.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Abdoulaye Ndiaye was there, so I'm really glad today to be here again to talk about it. Right. Okay, so during your presentation, there was a part where you say that, I don't know in which part, but you said that there was a monument that was built for George Floyd memory. And then there was a governor, I think it was Mr. Ralph. I think maybe...
in Virginia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he disagreed with that memory, and then that was removed.
Okay, so it wasn't a George Floyd monument. So I'll just go back to it. I'll show you what it is.
Okay.
So what happened was, it was the monument of the Confederate Robert E. Lee, okay, and it's in this area of Virginia that's called, in Richmond, that's called Monument Avenue. And so when the racial reckoning happened, what happened was this artist, Dustin Klein, did all these projections on the monument before it was removed. And so George Floyd, they did Harriet Tubman. It was a whole bunch of different black freedom people involved in the black freedom struggle. And so the monument, they've been arguing about this Confederate monument for years. There's several of them, okay, but this one is the most offensive because Robert E. Lee was the general that was the head of the Confederacy. And the Confederacy was, you know, the breakaway group during the Civil War in the United States that was trying to keep enslavement. And so people have been mad for years that we have this Lee Monument in Virginia and others all over the country. So they were finally, they've been fighting over this in Richmond for the last 10 years, where they've had a commission, they've had this, that, and the other one talking about it. And so finally, Ralph Northam, who was the governor at the time, he was a Democratic government, he was able to get the legislation, because also the state legislature had passed legislation to say that you couldn't take the monument down. So he was able to get that the local people couldn't take it down. So he was able to get the state legislature to change that law. And then as soon as he got it changed, he had them take that monument down. And it's not the only one of Lee that was taken down in the last few years. There's been others that have been taken down in other places, not just of Lee, but other racist leaders of the South. But Lee is the one that everybody is really upset about. And younger people are at a new place in terms of thinking about their freedom and identity, and they are more aggressive in expressing their displeasure with these monuments because of the freedom rights that they have been able to experience since the 1960s. The context that they grew up in is different than the context of their parents. And so even though things aren't perfect now, they're much better than they were in their parents' generations. Okay? So they're much more able to express themselves. And then when you have social media and all of that right now, that has also spread information around the country. It's helped people to see, oh, well, if they're doing that over in, if they're doing that in Minnesota, and they're doing that in Tennessee, and they're doing that in Georgia, well, why can't we do that in Alabama? Do you understand? So it helps to promote a movement of sorts. It's not organized. It's more organic and informal, but it's still a movement from the standpoint of people feeling the oppression of society or the things that they don't like, and they want to change them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I love this image.
Yes.
You know, and I'm like, oh, they shouldn't have taken the monument down. They should have, you know, just kept leaving those projections up there, you know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I believe that I know you can ask me generally this process because it is in a where sports is very different. So there you can even find many women who are more fit than me. So if you can go there, you can find women who ask you. You can ask this process. So women usually they practice sports in
No, don't worry about it. We'll get to show her. You know, Korka Iki is from chess, and she went to the US for a long time, so.
Right.
Everywhere we go, minorities or people have for their identity and to be strong, fight against this. Here now in Qatar, we find the modernization, social and popular place.
Say that again, the last part.
Yes, social leisure place for leisure games are solved.
Yeah.
There is no place for and so on. And the moment when we have created this, to do popular social
Okay.
and now if you go, you will see.
On the Corniche, yeah. Yeah.
See the government
Yeah.
will react and will try to get again public space.
So I have been noticing all of the development on the Corniche, and I had actually seen some pictures of it before I came here. And so I think it's wonderful that that's happening. But I was like walking through the city in different places, and I'm like, there's no parks. You know? And so I'm like, it's just, you know, I'm sorry guys, but it's an urban planning nightmare here. And so that's been fascinating to kind of understand in terms of the space. And then I was like, oh, you got that big field right there where the old airport is.
Yes.
They need to make that
Yes.
into a park.
Yes, yes.
Okay? And you know, move the military someplace else out of town. They need to make that into a park.
And for your own motivation, what is your own motivation to have open these topics for your jobs?
So how I got to this subject matter is when I started graduate school, I was looking at something, I wanted to do something in terms of my research that was meaningful to me and to my community, okay? And so with that, I always been interested in history before I went back to school in history, because I went back to get my master's degree and my PhD at the less traditional age of most people that get their advanced degrees. And so with that, I was looking at stories that I had heard of my family. My grandparents on my mother's side moved to California in the 1920s. And so they were around in the 1920s when all of these leisure sites were forming. And one of the ones that I know that they went to was at Lake Elsinore, which is more inland. When I started doing the research, I was focused on that at first, and with my master's degree in heritage conservation, I didn't know that I was going to get a PhD when I started the master's degree. While I was in process, they said to me, oh, you should think about getting a PhD, and I was like, what? And so as things progressed, I realized for me, that's what I should do. And so then I also, in getting the master's degree, learned more about all these other places other than Lake Elsinore, the Santa Monica Beach, the other inland places that I talk about, the Bruce's Beach. I learned a little more about them, and I did my first kind of study of them, my first paper in my master's degree program. And so when I decided that I wanted to get a PhD, and then I got asked to write a scholarly article right when I finished my master's degree about the Santa Monica Beach area, and I was like, oh, I like that. And then I was working in heritage conservation, which is preserving building heritage, building and people heritage, and I didn't really like it. It was interesting, but when you're a consultant, I was working as a consultant, I had to, with the firm I was with, we had to work on whatever projects came through the door. So if a city wanted us to do ordinances for them, or if a developer wanted a national register monument, a national register listing of a building, we had to do things that they wanted to do. I didn't get to work on my own work, and so I realized that I wanted to do my own projects, and so getting the PhD allowed me to do all the research on these various areas that I didn't know a lot about, and also to expand my knowledge base of American history in general, and the African American experience. And I'm much happier. So it was an evolutionary process, but it was really about, I wanted to do something that was meaningful to me and to African American people.
All right. So, Professor, how many more minutes do we have?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, 5 is 5. I don't know if you need a few minutes more.
All right. So maybe we can take one. Yes.
So
Is it okay for you?
It's fine. If somebody has other questions, I would love to know one thing. I would like to know who everybody is. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, like introduce.
Hi, my name's Alyssa Flippin. I'm from University of Minnesota. I'm an undergrad student. We're here with MSID. It's a study abroad program. We're practicing our French and learning more about Senegalese culture and things like that. So.
What's your major?
My major is neuroscience.
Okay.
And I minored in French, so that's where my interest in French comes from.
My name is Basia Montwali. I go to Wheaton College. It's in Massachusetts, Norton, Massachusetts.
You said where?
Wheaton College. It's in like Norton, Massachusetts.
I still didn't hear you.
Wheaton.
Wheaton, spell it.
Wheaton.
Okay, Wheaton.
Yeah. You know it. There's two. So the one in Massachusetts. I'm an undergrad. I'm a double major in political science and international relations. Yeah. And then I also minor in French.
Okay. Well, I'm Sophia. I'm here for the MSID pre-session, which is just about French language. But these two, I think, are here for more of the international development side of things. But I'm here to study French. That's one of my majors. My other major is mechanical engineering through the University of Minnesota.
I'm Sophia as well, Sophia Hawk. Yes, I attend the University of Minnesota, here for the Minnesota Studies and International Development program. I'm a double major in global studies and linguistics, and I have a minor in teaching English as a second language. Yeah. Thank you for your presentation.
And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aliuba. I am a student at Sheikh Anta Diop University in African Study in Master 2. Thank you, Dr. Allison, for your wonderful presentation and recollecting again the connection between African Africans and American people. It is very, very interesting. Thank you a lot.
We heard from you, so we...
You heard from me.
Yes.
Okay, no need to introduce myself.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Usman Faye, I'm a student of American and Caribbean Studies. I'm a student of Master 2. Okay, congratulations for your presentation. It's a very important one. And I have one question to ask. The question is, what was the relationship between the black and the white in the beach? Was it a conflictual one or a peaceful one?
So it would depend on where you were.
Okay.
In California, because California did not have those separate but equal laws during the Jim Crow era, black people could go pretty much anywhere they wanted to at the beach, legally. Okay, but sometimes you would go to places and people weren't nice to you. And so you might not want to go there again. The white people weren't nice to you. So you might not want to go there again, but you knew that you could go to the beach in Santa Monica because there was a space that African Americans had carved out for themselves in front of a public park. So therefore, if the city tried to move them away from that beach, then the legal framework would really kick in a way that they could take advantage of it. Sometimes with the private property, if you were near a piece of private property, and you get into some gray areas with that. But it just would depend. In California, we didn't have so much violence on the beach. There were a couple of incidents in the Jim Crow era, but generally that wasn't happening. The black folks that came to California, they were much more aggressive in fighting for their rights because they knew that there were not those separate but equal laws. Whereas in Florida, there were some instances in Florida as late as the early 1960s where black people were going to the beach where white people were, and the white people were fighting them in the water to not use the beach, and the police came out to take them out of the water. Places in the other parts of the South, in Alabama, those things happened there as well. So it just would depend on where you were in the country. Discrimination happened in the Jim Crow era all over the United States. It's just, it was different everywhere you were.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mohamed Niang. I'm the director of Languages Institute of SUBDECO, and I graduated from University of Cheikh Anta Diop University. One of my former teachers, probably he doesn't recognize me, because I remember at that time it was the rooms were very full, and he was very fighting to make sure that everyone understand exactly what he was explaining, and I congratulate you for that. Okay. And congratulations again, Dr. Jefferson. Of course, when I got in, I found you being in the middle of your explanation. For sure, we'll have time to go through your book, and maybe if you have some, let's say, upcoming questions, we'll raise them in the future. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Ibrahim Akande, a master's student at the Cheikh Anta Diop University. I am doing American Studies. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Bashir from Sionian. I am teaching African literature and African contemporary novel at the university in Conakry in Guinea, but I'm also established here in Senegal. Thank you very much. I had the pleasure of talking with you before the conference, and I'm very happy for the topic you developed. And like everybody, I thank you very much for the quality of your research and for the interest of your research. Thank you very much.
All right, yes, thank you. No, I just would like to thank again Dr. Jefferson for her brilliant presentation, but mostly also for her work, which is very important, and it will be a pleasure to read your book and exchange more with you on all those interesting issues. Thank you very much. And if you have the last comments before Professor Sen can have his few words.
I just thank you all for wanting to hear what I had to say.
Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. Maybe a few announcements. Number one, if Dr. Alison Rose Jefferson is generous to donate a copy of her book to the library of a center, it will be available for you just in case you think about writing something toward your master's dissertation or PhD, I don't know. The second one is that during Black History Month, I was just thinking about having either the film, if there is any, or a panel discussion on somebody whose name is getting to go around the world. His name is Omar Ibn Said. There was a symposium at the Museum of Black Civilization about him. Apparently, a Senegalese Muslim who was taken into bondage and who kept his faith and did wonderful things in the United States.
I saw the opera.
Huh?
I saw the opera.
Yeah. Among the people who came here to discuss him is somebody from the Library of Congress, and she is very keen on having the discussion go on. But if she is available and would like to Zoom with somebody or some people around here to offer you a presentation on Omar, I am very willing to include it in our roster for Black History Month. Talking about Black History Month, here is the president of the Association of Senegalese Association of American Studies, so I think they will be presenting a number of things along with what we at work will be offering you as possibilities. Most of them will be African American films. I need to go through our list and see maybe those which have not been shown to you yet, if at all possible. On March 8th, Women's Day, right? The Africa Memorial Square, Place du Souvenir Africain, asked me to show the film dealing with the Underground Railroad and that famous lady, and also discuss it with the public. I will certainly do it with happiness. That being said, Abdullah, thank you very much for making yourself available. As I told you, there is a group of students coming from Lafayette College, and they would like to visit campus, interact with a student, and then come and have lunch here. I asked Abdullah to just give you the exact date, hour, and day, and if you are not in class on that day, if you could have them maybe sit in a class of one of your willing colleagues to get the experience of how we teach around here, that would be great. Korka, your students are looking at me. Yeah, if for instance, for one reason or another, they would like also to go and sit in a class in the Department of English, you can arrange it with willing and able Abdullah Njai, right? Huh? Okay, so Alison Rose Jefferson, Doctor, thank you very much for taking the trouble to come here at the West African Research Center. We were very honored to hear you, and do it often. This is not going to be a single act. Each time you are in Senegal, offer to discuss something. We'll be more than happy to host you, and these gentlemen and ladies will be more than happy to come and listen to you. Thank you very much, everybody. That's it.
I was planning to donate the book.
Okay. You will be, or you have this copy?
This is,
one?
yeah.